Picture a movie director in your head right now. What are they actually doing? You're probably imagining someone holding this massive camera on their shoulder, right? Or maybe they're sitting in a canvas chair yelling through a giant megaphone, just barking orders at everyone in sight. But what if I told you that the person controlling the camera is almost never the director, and that the real job is something far more complex, a lot more stressful, and honestly, way more fascinating?
Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're tearing down all those Hollywood myths and breaking down the real mechanics of directing films. We're going to explore exactly how a director transforms a totally abstract idea into a fully realized cinematic experience. We're talking about establishing a creative vision, mastering technical elements like camera angles, lighting, and sound, and managing the massive responsibilities of a director on set as the chief creative officer.
Okay, let's dive into this. We're covering the chief creative officer, cultivating a unique perspective, the cinematic technical toolkit, shaping the story in post-production, and finally, the ultimate audience member.
Starting right off with Section 1, the Chief Creative Officer.
You know, the biggest misconception about directing is that it's this completely hands-on, gear-heavy job. And this brilliantly illustrates the reality by comparing it to a corporate CEO. A CEO doesn't personally manufacture the product or sit there doing the daily accounting, right? They set the overarching vision and rely on department managers. Well, it's exactly the same on a film set. You might have anywhere from 10 to literally 100 crew members running around. The director acts as the chief creative decision-maker. They're signing off on the choices made by expert heads of department like the director of photography or the production designer. It's really this massive job of delegating while keeping everyone locked on to a unified perspective.
To really drive this home, look at this incredible insight from Quentin Tarantino. He basically points out that you don't need to know the intricate mechanics of putting a bunch of different light stands together just to create a specific effect. Actually, scratch that. Doing the physical labor is absolutely not your job. Your job is to have a crystal clear vision and, crucially, to know exactly how to express it to the experts who are going to physically build it for you.
Which brings us to Section 2, cultivating a unique perspective.
So before you can even express a vision to your crew, you've got to figure out what you actually want to say, and instilling your vision follows a few core steps. First up, you have to determine your perspective. What's the actual theme or message here? But here's the real trick for step 2. You have to show it visually, without words. Honestly, having a character just stare at the camera and state your theme out loud is incredibly boring. Instead, a great director leaves these little visual tidbits and clues scattered throughout the scenes for the audience to discover on their own. It turns your perspective into this engaging mystery rather than, a boring lecture.
So where do you actually draw your inspiration from to build that visual mystery? Well, it's pretty simple. What you bring into your brain comes out in your art. Notice the trendy side here. If you're only ever scrolling TikTok, Instagram, or just binge watching the latest Netflix hits, your films are just going to repeat current trends. So the crucial point is to build a holistic, truly timeless perspective. You have to expose yourself to diverse, older art forms. Look at the entire history of cinema. Go study Renaissance paintings. Listen to classical music. Even art you don't initially like can be incredibly valuable, because the more diverse the art you consume, the more interesting of a storyteller you ultimately become. Moving right along to Section 3, the Cinematic Technical Toolkit.
Once you actually have that deep, timeless vision, how do you execute it? Well, the most fundamental tool in crafting exactly what your audience looks at is the rule of thirds. If you just shoot absolutely everything in wide shots, you leave nothing to the imagination. By placing your subject on a visual grid, you generally want their eye line to hit the top third of the frame. And more importantly, you must leave empty space in the other 2/3 of the screen for them to look into. Because if there's only dead space behind their head, the shot just feels completely unnatural.
Let's move to and see how this builds directly into scene geography with the 180-degree rule. Imagine you're watching two characters talk, but suddenly they both look like they're talking to the exact same wall. Yeah, that happens when you break this rule. When two characters are chatting, you often use over-the-shoulder shots, and the rule dictates that you have to stay on one side of this invisible, imaginary line between them. If you look over the right shoulder of one character, you need to look over the left shoulder of the other one. If you cross that 180-degree line, spatial awareness just completely falls apart and your audience is instantly confused about where anyone is standing in the room.
Another incredibly powerful tool is lens compression. This is literally how directors use focal lengths to directly manipulate audience emotions. So for characters lost in the wilderness, zooming very far out with a wide lens exaggerates that space, right? It makes their surroundings feel massively overwhelming and isolating. But on the flip side, if you zoom all the way in on a longer lens, the space between the background and the subject physically compresses in the image, and that creates this tight, cramped, and just incredibly claustrophobic feeling. Now, film obviously isn't just visual. I mean, how much does sound actually dictate the cinematic experience? Honestly, it's one of the most overlooked elements on set. Those built-in microphones on entry-level cameras are omnidirectional, which means they're going to pick up a screaming siren or an airplane just as loudly as your lead actor. So directors must understand specific mics. Shotgun mics are highly directional, usually mounted on boom poles to isolate the actor's voice from above. Then you have condenser mics, which offer this really rich, bassy sound that's perfect for voiceovers, but they require the actor to be mere inches away. And finally, lavalier or lav mics. These are tiny, totally discreet, and easily hidden on a shirt collar, which makes them perfect for something like a documentary interview.
Finally, to really shape the image, directors rely heavily on a three-point lighting setup. First, you have the key light, and that's the brightest source hitting the face. Next, the fill light sits on the opposite side to soften up those harsh shadows and dial back the contrast. And then the edge or rim light hits the subject from behind, which creates this nice halo effect that separates them from the background. Directors can also use colored gels over these lights too. Think about casting a cold, eerie blue for a sci-fi feel, or maybe a deep red for horror to instantly establish the mood. Understanding all these tools matters so much because every single light, mic, and lens choice is exactly what physically translates your abstract vision into a reality that the audience can actually feel.
Let's transition over to Section 4, Shaping Story in Post-Production.
Once those cameras finally stop rolling, the final rewrite happens in the edit bay, and it very often starts with this concept right here, the power of silence. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it pushes back against our instincts. It is so incredibly tempting to fill every single second of your film with snappy dialogue, explosive action, or a massive, swelling musical score. But honestly, sometimes the absolute best scenes are completely silent. Your audience desperately needs breathing room. They need the time to watch a character think and to digest all the heavy themes or traumatic events that just occurred on screen.
And creating that perfect pacing requires a totally ruthless approach to cutting. You have to constantly ask yourself, does this scene actually matter to the core theme? I guarantee you, 9 times out of 10, making your film shorter makes it better. The first cut of a film is almost always hours longer than it has any right to be. Just look at this example from our sources. A director had a first assembly cut that ran an exhausting 2 hours and 20 minutes. But by ruthlessly asking what the film actually needed, they hacked away 40 entire minutes of footage. And that brought the final, much stronger film down to a really tight, punchy 1 hour and 46 minutes.
The frequency of those cuts also dictates the audience's biological response. Take horror pacing, for example. You generally start slow, with very few cuts, maybe just 5 or 6 over an entire minute. But then, as the main storyline kicks into gear and the tension starts rising, the director increases the frequency of the cuts to maybe once every 3 or 4 seconds. This rapid-fire editing keeps the audience completely on their toes. It gives them way less time to analyze the frame, which builds an intense, almost suffocating sense of mystery and anxiety.
And that brings us to Section 5, the ultimate audience member.
Let's pull the lens all the way back to the physical set for a second. Since the absolute dawn of cinema, the director's sacred duty has been watching and adjusting the performances of the actors. It's actually a very strict rule on professional sets that no one else, not the wealthy producers, not the camera operators, no one is allowed to give performance notes to the actors. Why? Because the director absolutely must be the single, trusted voice guiding the actor to find the exact character that the vision demands. You have to build that rapport and fiercely protect their creative process.
So ultimately, all of this chaos boils down to one monumental task. The director's ultimate job is to view every single take, every single shot entirely through the perspective of the audience. While the assistant director might run the daily logistics of the ship, the director is the one maintaining the tone and the mood. They're the one who has to trust their gut to say when to roll, when to cut, when to do it again, and most importantly, when they've captured the absolute magic and it's time to move on to the next scene.
So I want to leave you with this final, truly vital question. Are you watching as the audience? It's so unbelievably easy for aspiring creatives to get entirely bogged down in the technical gear. We all worry about getting the perfect camera, the fanciest lighting gels, or the absolute most expensive microphones. But none of that matters even a little bit if the scene doesn't connect. Your job isn't to be a technician. Your job is to be the first audience member. Stop worrying so much about the gear and start focusing relentlessly on how your work actually makes people feel. Because that, my friends, is what a director actually does. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep creating.